Stupid GPS keeps freezing.
You're fine, just keep driving on 20. You'll get there. Come on, Felix, pick up.
Just leave it. They'll send word when they're safe. You should try and sleep. Just don't thrash around and scream, please.
I'll sure try. What if they crashed?
We can't do anything. We don't even know where they're going.
So what do?
We keep driving to Galena. We find the words and we get answers. This is insane.
You're telling me.
What did we learn from Felix's recording?
Right now, I don't care. Sure, even more confirmation of a cult burning the bodies, and yes, they're almost definitely responsible for killing my dad. We just don't know which one did it. But one of them sent the letter to Mom. Yes, the doctor is still alive, which, isn't that surprising, fake body or something in the funeral. Anyway, he's part of the cult. I mean, we can assume the identity of many cult members, but, who knows? I mean, maybe there's more than just one group. Oh, and let's not forget that they have magical powers that set people on fire, make trees move, and take bubbling remains of my boss to make a living woman. Because, sure, might as well happen. But none of that matters, because my friends are in danger. They're being chased by NPC meat puppets controlled by Dr. Frankenstein. That good enough of a summary for you, great investigator Philip?
You're remembering things.
I'm scared. Right?
What about Ariadne's letter?
I don't want to talk about it.
Well, what's their motive? The cult.
Fear.
There's more to it than that.
Sure. Their stupid, greater purpose. But it's enough for me. We find the words. They're scared of the cult, it may be, but they're afraid of something. Something's killing them, destroying the books. So we use that, leverage. It's calling me, so we should answer, right?
We can't trust them. Not after everything.
I know, it's just... What happened to you? No sane person just risks their job to take a possibly dangerous prisoner on a joyride. You've been weird from the start. You hound your boss to bring me in. You go against your superiors to keep questioning me. I mean, you borderline torture me. Are you just that committed? What do you want?
You're not going to let this go, are you?
No.
Fine. I like you better when your memory doesn't work. Ready, Radio Man? Story time.
Welcome to the Beating Heartland, created by Denver Baughman.
Episode 18. The Lake.
There's a lot of jobs in the FBI. My original career was in a group that got sent in to deal with things when they went from bad to worse.
So you were SWAT or something?
Basically, yes.
Huh.
Don't seem the type to you?
Not really.
Well, I'm not. Not anymore. But I used to be one of the best. Just don't tell any of them I said that.
So what changed?
I did. You've seen I'm not used to interrogation and investigation. I got the exciting part. This whole burning corpse, people in the woods chanting, and human sacrifices thing isn't that new to me. I've dealt with cults before. It's part of the reason they threw me in here. They're more common than people think, cults. People are always looking for something to believe in, and when someone promises you answers, it's easy to fall into the trap.
Yeah.
If we do our job, we deal with the cult the moment they become violent, and most people won't know they existed. The last one wasn't supposed to be any different.
When was the last one?
Early 2021. This was in Chicago. I hadn't been stationed there long, but because of my specialties, they wanted me for some specific duties. They figured it was going to take a while, so my family relocated.
Your You haven't told me about them yet.
I'll get to it. Anyway, there was a cult in Chicago that was spreading through a few high-profile corporations. One in particular. That isn't common. Usually we focus on the uneducated and underprivileged. People who need something outside themselves to feel purpose. However, it's not unheard of. People often find their jobs unfulfilling, even high up, and lose hope. That's prime pickings. There was a whistleblower in the cult. We decided there wasn't time for the investigators to do their job, so we went in. Final straw was when we learned people were being kidnapped and held in the company building. When we got in, it was worse than expected. Blood writing on the walls, malnourished young girls, people bound, worshippers chanting. It was straight out of a bad cop movie that hams it up, except it was real. And 10 times worse. I killed a lot of people that day.
I'm sorry.
It was part of the job. They had young girls held hostage. I'm not sorry I did it, but this time, the women screaming, bloody bodies on the floor, and the smell.
You had a breakdown?
I'm supposed to be desensitized to this stuff. It was stupid.
No, it's not.
I've never reacted this way before.
I guess this time it just felt too real. Trust me, breakdowns don't usually make sense. Okay, wait, are you saying that they sent you to the SID because you had one breakdown?
No, but they gave me a vacation. Said, take some time, be with your family, get your head back on straight. No one really judged me. Some of them joked about it, but it was just good-natured, trying to make light of it. They all know what it's like to see stuff you'd rather forget.
So what? Oh!
Are they calling?
No. Stupid telemarketer. Sorry. Just... You okay over there?
GPS froze again.
Yeah, sorry. We have dead zones all over this area. Is it okay?
I think so, yeah. Where was I?
Break from the SWAT.
Right. Well, my bosses figured I needed a new atmosphere, so they rented me a vacation home next to Lake Michigan. My daughter was thrilled. Out of school for 2 weeks, and she got to be next to a beach. Best trip ever.
You have a daughter?
Yeah. She was 8. Cynthia. Smart as a whip, almost too curious. The questions just never stopped. She loved reading and recreating the stories with her dolls, trying to figure out what happened after the story ended. She read a lot more than she should have for her age. My wife was excited about the trip too. I'd been focusing so much on work that she barely saw me. She said this would be an excellent time to reconnect. And that's what it should have been.
Was it nice? The house?
It was perfect. Except for the neighbor, old Mrs. Halen. She was a widow and just weird. She would stare at the lake for hours, just rocking on her chair and mumbling to herself. She had this way of staring at you like she was having a conversation without saying a word. Also, she left a plate of food on her porch in the evening. That isn't necessarily strange, but she didn't have any pets. She was old, so we tried to ignore her, but for whatever reason, Cynthia loved her. She would go over to her house and come back with crazy stories. As for our house, it was on the old side, so it had creaks and leaks, but otherwise it was a beautiful beachside property. The first few days were very relaxing, but then the nightmares started.
Nightmares?
Of the cult. Images of their bodies, the blood, the screaming. They would rush toward me from all sides, pushing in, suffocating. Sometimes I was one of the cult members, writhing in pain on the ground, blood pouring out. I would wake up sweating, my wife trying to hold me and comfort me. She asked what was wrong. I never told her, just bad dream, go back to sleep. It got bad. Bad enough that Cynthia asked during breakfast why she heard screaming at night. They both looked at me. I ignored them and said I was going out, meeting up with a friend. In the car, I called up my buddy from the agency, Tucker Reese. Not much thinking happens when you're with Tucker. He's always been a wild card. Has a lot of mental scars in a short amount of time. We drank and talked all day. When I returned home, the sun had already set. While I was attempting, and failing, to put my key in the door, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was Mrs. Halen rocking on her chair, but I saw a dark shape hunched over her porch. The figure was convulsing. I remembered the plate of food Mrs. Halen left out. I was about to shine my phone flashlight at it when Virginia opened the door. I spun, scared by her sudden appearance. She didn't look happy and asked why I'd been gone so long. I sputtered and slurred an apology, glanced back at Mrs. Halen's porch. The figure was gone. Virginia and I fought, nothing significant. She never liked Tucker, and she wasn't happy I spent so much time away from them during our vacation without communicating with her.
Sorry for interrupting. Can we go back to the figure on the porch?
What about it?
I mean, well, what was it?
I don't know. Big dog?
Really?
It was dark, but you're right.
Sorry, keep going. This is getting good.
You're enjoying this?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's familiar territory for me. I mean, other people's trauma and story form, it's great. It's not me this time.
Okay. Well, after the fight, Virginia told me Cynthia had gone to Mrs. Halen's and explored her library some more. I wasn't happy about that. I didn't like the thought of Cynthia hanging out with her. My wife said she's just an old lady who needs the company. She insisted I tuck Cynthia into bed. I agreed. It was the least I could do, as Virginia was quick to remind me. So I hobbled up the steps, still very drunk. For a minute, I couldn't remember where her room was. I thought it was down the hall and quietly opened the door. It wasn't her room. I was in what looked like a nursery. Gold cradle, baby toys, paint peeling off the walls that were decorated with animals and rainbows. There was an old black and white photo on the dresser. In the picture, a man was smiling, most of his face covered by a wide-brim hat. He was wearing a long coat and seemed to be in the middle of the woods. There was another picture of a little girl in what looked like her mother. It was taken in the same place as the man. I didn't know this room existed, and neither did the people who rented out the house, because it was covered in dust. Cynthia called, "Dad!" from her room. I turned to leave, and something moved in the corner of my eye. I spun and stumbled, but there was nothing. Except the cradle was slowly rocking like something had brushed it. Cynthia called again. She was lying in bed when I entered her room, her lamp on, covered in colored gels that made the room look like the ocean. She smiled and yawned, her glasses sliding down her nose, an oversized leather book in her lap. It looked old, the paper browning.
An old leather book.
Yes.
So you think the words... Oh.
Yeah. But I didn't know that at the time. I sat beside Cynthia, tousled her hair, and asked her where she got it. She explained that Mrs. Halen had given it to her. The book had meant a lot to her son and helped answer a lot of his questions. She said the books had talked to her, wanting to answer her questions. My mind wandered as she spoke. I glanced at the book. Something about it felt wrong to me, but my mind was too groggy. Then Cynthia asked me if I was okay. My head snapped up and I lied. Of course I was all right. I'm her big, strong dad. She looked sad and said I hoped I could be okay again. She looked at me. Maybe the book will help the memories go away. I hadn't really told her about the memories. I kissed her on the forehead goodnight, told her to go to bed, and hurried out of the room.
Did you go back to the other room, the one with the photos?
I couldn't. Not that I didn't want to. I couldn't. I looked back down the hall and there wasn't a door.
That didn't strike you as weird?
With how drunk I was, you should be thankful I even remember it.
Fair enough. Okay, so your daughter had a book. What happened?
I got worse. While drunk, the visions went away, but during the day when I was sober, they came back. The blood, screams, bodies, and smell of the gun. I started spending every day with Tucker or other agents at the bars. They didn't complain. I drank every day, trying to drown out the memories. The agency made me meet with a therapist at the beginning of each week to check up on my progress. That was taking a lot longer than they wanted. A month had passed. They said they cared for my well-being and were helping me through the trial, but at the end of the day, all they cared about was getting me back to work as soon as possible. I wasn't the only one acting different. Cynthia started going back to school, but whenever she was home, she was reading and rereading that book. Virginia said Cynthia went to the lake a lot, talking to people that weren't there. Cynthia had never been one for imaginary friends. The dolls and books had been enough. Virginia blamed me for not being around, and Cynthia was trying to find a connection with something since her father wouldn't. I'd been a stranger to her. Virginia and I fought a lot, usually in hushed tones so Cynthia didn't hear. I could tell Virginia wasn't telling me everything. She kept asking when we were going back to our house, or when I was going back to work. She looked worried, like she'd seen something, but refused to talk about herself. She was trying to help me. She wanted to take what I was going through seriously. She'd always been better than me. But something was scaring her, and it wasn't just me. Something was wrong with Cynthia. She was distant and absorbed in that book. I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. I had my own problems. On a few occasions, I woke up wet in the morning, like I'd been sweating all night, but it smelled like the lake. I asked Virginia if she or Cynthia were pranking me and throwing water on me in the night. She didn't know anything about it. Whenever I saw Cynthia, she would ramble on about the lake, facts about it, the exciting things she found next to the water. She talked about someone named Greg. Figured this was the name of her imaginary friend. She asked if I wanted to read the book and said it would help me be happy again. I told her I was happy, but she just frowned and said, "You're not. Greg sees it too. The lake can help, Daddy." Everything got worse. It fell apart in one day, about a month and a half into the vacation. It had been building to this moment, but I'd been too blind and drunk to see or care until it was over. I wish I could tell you everything, but I only know snippets. My wife saw things in the house. She saw what her family was becoming, but wasn't able to fix anything. She was being shut out by the people she loved. I saw Cynthia obsessed with the lake. The leaks in the house became more frequent, a green goo oozing out of the faucets. My nightmares became more vivid, but starting to include a lake of blood pouring from the wounds of the cult. The rooms seemed to change and shift whenever I came home, drunk and stumbling through them. The dark forms I saw outside, watching our house, eating at Mrs. Halen's porch. I didn't care about any of it. Then, one morning, Virginia and I had the biggest fight ever. We screamed. I can't even remember what it was about. The visions were playing behind her. My head was throbbing. Cynthia was crying, begging us to stop. Virginia was pleading for me to stay home, to be a family, to realize that things weren't right. I screamed at her, "Of course everything isn't all right." She yelled, "Let us help you." Cynthia sobbed and ran up to her room. I heard her screaming, "I can fix this. I can help Mommy and Daddy." I stormed out of the house. Drank until the nightmares and the sound of my wife's screams and my daughter's cries were just a fuzzy memory. I returned home that evening to a new nightmare. It had begun storming, and the rain was coming down in sheets. It's a miracle I made it home. Mrs. Halen was watching our house intently. I ignored her, just smiled and nodded. The door was open, splintered like someone had broken in. Water gushed out of the door like a river, almost pushing me over. I yelled, "Cynthia! Virginia!" And I heard a scream. My daughter's scream. I sloshed through the water. The house is flooding, coming up to my knees. When I got to the living room, I couldn't process what I saw. My wife was sobbing, drenched, and pulling at the form of my daughter, splashing in the water. Dazed, I ran to help. Have you ever seen a sea lamprey?
I don't think so.
Well, imagine a long, snake-like body, almost a tube, slimy, round-sucking mouth with several rows of teeth. They were all over Cynthia, about a dozen of them, biting into her skin, burrowing. She was sobbing, "This is supposed to help us. You'll feel better soon. No more fighting. No more nightmares. Daddy will be better soon. They promised." The leather book was lying open in the water. The water seemed to pour out of it. The walls were oozing green algae. I was trying to get the lampreys off, but every time I pulled, they clenched harder and Cynthia cried out in pain. Virginia was screaming, and I didn't notice when she stopped. I was drunk, but the vision still returned. The blood, the screaming. But replaced by my daughter and wife, and it was my fault. It's going to be okay, baby. It's going to be okay. I'm here. I'm here now, please. Please. The water was rising and the lampreys were pulling her under, filling her mouth with water. I screamed, yanking the lampreys desperately. But I heard the quiet voice of my wife behind me. Philip, please help. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to leave Cynthia. I quickly glanced towards my wife, and she wasn't alone. His eyes were large, almost like a toddler. His skin was pale and puckered, like when you stay in a pool for too long. Slimy green patches of algae spotted his face, and his body seemed to sloosh around like he was a higher percentage of water, pieces of skin dripping off of him. From his mouth, water dribbled. He was holding Virginia against him, his dripping skin falling against her. He looked bored, like it didn't know what it was doing. Virginia was breathing fast. She kept trying to escape, but she seemed to be sticking to the slimy skin. Cynthia screamed, Craig, this isn't right. This isn't what we wanted, is it? She was choking on the water now, barely able to speak. The wet face of Craig looked down and frowned. The lampreys started to pull Cynthia towards the door. She screamed, lashing out, trying to grab the furniture. I lunged towards her, grabbing around the waist. A rope of algae grabbed my foot and pulled me away, slamming me against the wall. My legs snapped. I cried out in pain, and the rope wrapped around my neck. I heard a final scream from my daughter, and she was pulled out of my sight into the rushing flood. My wife was crying, her body shaking. Desperate, something in my brain snapped into place. I reached for my gun under my shirt. At the time, I never left my house without it. I pointed it at the monster. The nightmare sprung to life around it, the form of my wife and daughter in the cult dying in agony. My vision blurred. I was still drunk. I aimed straight at Greg, between his large, bored eyes, and I fired the gun. The cops found me several hours later holding my wife, a bullet wound in her head. I didn't speak for days. The police searched for Cynthia. They thought she was kidnapped. How could they understand? I didn't tell them. When I finally talked about what happened, still in the hospital, recovering from strangulation and a broken leg, I made sure only the head of my department was there. He wanted to throw me into a psychiatric hospital. They didn't. The only thing they could figure out was that it was a trauma response. Regardless, my boss wanted nothing to do with me.
Wait. I mean, so what happened to the monster? The lampreys? I mean, the book?
Oh. The monster just stood there, staring at me. I shot at it several times. Bullets just sunk into it. It didn't seem to hurt. I screamed, and Mrs. Halen appeared. She was saying something to the monster. It turned away from me and sulked towards the door. Mrs. Halen glanced at Virginia and then up at me. She shook her head and frowned, a single tear traveling down her face. She picked up the leather book and closed it with a snap. The flooding receded. The algae-covered walls returned to normal, and any signs of the night were gone except my wife. Mrs. Halen walked to the door, hugged the thing standing there, and they left. I didn't do anything. Couldn't stand. I could barely see. That's what you wanted to know?
Philip,
Save it. I don't need your pity.
I'm sorry.
I said, you know my tragic past. Happy? So you want to know why I'm so set on finding those words? Sure, we might find answers. Great. But whatever happens, they die today. I don't know what they were, but something about your files seemed too similar. And then Sally talked to us, and we found the Heartland episode. And I knew then that you're my ticket to them.
Philip, wait, Philip, Where are we?
We're almost there. Wait, did you touch the GPS? It's frozen. It won't let me do anything. What did you do?
No, I didn't touch anything.
Where are we?
Oh. Up ahead, it's my mom's house.
Shannon? We're in Shannon.
It's not in the caves.
What?
The words. It brought us here. The words are in her house.
The Beating Heartland was written by Denver Baughman. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on whatever streaming platform you are using. Follow us online at The Beating Heartland. Thank you for listening.